again to our show, Faith in Haverhill. Your host, Pastor Rick Harrington, pastor at First Baptist Church right here in Haverhill on Main Street. It's a time to talk about ministry and ethics and current events. And I'm here with my next guest, Alex Burgess. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Yeah, good to have you here. Good to have you here. Well, I'd like to start off the show just asking our guests about how they became a Christian. A little bit about yourself, maybe about your family, and then how you became a Christian.
Yeah, well, I grew up actually in Western New York, outside of Rochester. My mother was from Western New York. My dad is from Providence. So I definitely have New England in my bones too, and grew up a Red Sox fan in Yankee and Met country. But we're a church-going family. We attended a church in suburban Rochester. My family's very faithful to the church.
What kind of church? What denomination was that?
It was part of the Assemblies of God denomination.
Okay.
And in Webster, New York. And very good people there, a good experience growing up. I know that many people have different experiences in church, and sometimes not, unfortunately, it doesn't always go well for people growing up in church. But I am thankful that I grew up in a very nice church and with a very nice family, and had a good experience there. So as I went along, though, I mean, as I reached my teenage years, I started having my doubts and wondering if this was all real, and wondering if the faith of my parents was really mine as well. So I struggled for a bit, and kind of sometimes kept the doubts private, sometimes shared them. But in college, I continued to read, continued to explore, and in the end came around to really owning the faith for myself and believing in Jesus Christ, and so that shaped my life. I actually got interested in theology and studying, and I went on to seminary down in Philadelphia.
What did you major in college? Did you end up?
Oh, in college I majored in, first of all, music and history.
Okay.
And then I decided that music, I enjoyed it, but I didn't like to take all the courses they wanted me to take. So I became a humanities major, where I could do a lot of music, but the courses I liked. And but I also did a history major. So I did history and humanities. And actually I considered going on for a history PhD. That was my goal in college. And I went to seminary thinking I would just study some theology, religious history, and then move on to a PhD program somewhere. But while in seminary, I worked in a church in South Philadelphia, a congregational church there on 3rd and Snyder, and enjoyed it very much, and really started to love ministry, to love working with people of different racial backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, interesting and challenging urban environment.
Philadelphia?
In Philadelphia, yes, in South Philadelphia, you know, Rocky, the movie, yeah, right.
Okay. So this is, you went to Westminster Theological Seminary?
I did go to, I went to Westminster Seminary in Philly, and so I was there for 3 years at the seminary. For the 3rd year of seminary, by that point I was married, and my wife and I were living there and just outside of Philadelphia. And I continued to work down in South Philly at a church, and she was a music director at a church up in Quakertown, Pennsylvania. So we were going in completely opposite directions for a while. But yeah, I really enjoyed my experience there. So then they actually asked me to come on staff there at that church, and I just soon after seminary I was ordained there at that church, and was there for another year before we came up to Haverhill, which is another story.
Okay. All right, great. So you mentioned your wife. So you're married for how many years now? Test here.
Yeah, 19 years, yeah.
Okay.
1996.
And you have 4 kids.
Yes.
Yep. What are their ages, names there?
So we have John. He's 17.
Okay.
He's a senior. And then Helen is almost 13. Okay. And she's in 7th grade. And then we have twins, a boy and a girl, Andreas and Eva, and they're 10. 10,
okay. Wow. So busy.
5th grade.
Busy home, busy family.
It is, indeed. Yeah. A lot of fun. They're wonderful kids. I enjoy them a lot.
Okay. So that's interesting. So, Alex, you weren't even sure you wanted to be a pastor even as you started seminary. But you were certain of your faith at that point in time. You just weren't
Right.
sure what direction you were going, and then
Exactly.
kind of fell in love with the church while
Yeah.
you were in seminary studying.
Yeah, and I realized I enjoyed studying, and I'm a bit of a bookish person, but I also realized that, I looked at some of my friends going into PhDs, and they were really like super serious about, studying in a very, singularly focused sort of way on some specific topic, and I'm not really that person. I'm more of a generalist. I like to study all sorts of things, and I don't know if I could ever have that kind of focus and discipline for a PhD program, but I really enjoy working with people, and so if I enjoy studying in a broad sort of way, and I enjoy working with people in the church, am I called? And so I started to wonder, maybe I'm called to the ministry. And I started to explore that with my pastor down there. And of course, I was at seminary, so I could explore it with a lot of other people that had already felt called.
Sure.
And I said, am I feeling this call? Is this really right? And those people, and I had a lot of good people around me that said, confirmed that for me, and said, yeah, we think you probably are hearing a call.
Excellent.
And so then I started to shift to that focus, and started taking those practical theology courses a little more seriously.
Okay, all right. And it's kind of neat, and we're going to get to this later on, but that that passion for teaching actually, because you're kind of in both roles.
Oh,
so
yeah.
it really played itself out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. I've thought about that. I coming into teaching, I feel like that aspect of that the part of me that wanted that PhD program, I feel like that wasn't right for me, obviously, but I'm so grateful I can teach, and that explores that part of me as well, being able to be forced to study and focus and impart something to my students, and of course learn from them as well, and all the challenges that come with teaching. I'm really grateful I can do that also.
Excellent. So you're in Philly, and you're finishing up seminary, and you're feeling called to pastoral ministry, and you end up on staff actually at the church there.
Yeah.
How'd you end up in Haverhill?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question.
Now you said that New England's in your blood because Rhode Island there.
Yes, so I love New England, and as a kid, we always spent time, parts of our summer up in Jackson, New Hampshire. My family has a home, and of course I grew up rooting for all the Boston teams and trying to come to New England to see the Red Sox and so on, and a lot of family in Connecticut and Rhode Island and Massachusetts and other places. So was very familiar with New England, and so any thought of coming to New England was a positive one. I was excited for that possibility, and there was a gentleman, the pastor at Ward Hill Church here in Haverhill in the 90s, from 94 to 98, was a man by the name of Wayne Earl. And actually, the listeners might find this interesting. Wayne Earl is the father of Esther Earl, who became kind of famous on YouTube, and a friend of John Green, the Nerd Fighters. And John Green dedicated, the author dedicated his book, The Fault in Our Stars, to Esther Earl.
Oh, is that right?
And
wow.
So she, and one time there was, like last year, CBS or ABC, one of those news programs, did a story on Esther Earl because of Fault in Our Stars was coming out as a movie and so on. And they showed some pictures of Esther, and there was our church parsonage because she lived there for the first 4 years of her life. So that was an interesting little side note there. But Wayne Earl, though, was an old friend of mine from in high school. My family and I lived in Belgium for a while, and we had met Wayne and his wife Lori Earl there. And so Wayne was really more friends with my parents. I was in high school at the time, so even though he was a little closer to me in age, he was really more friends with my parents. So he was talking to my folks and said that he was interested in teaching in the Middle East. He was going to go to Saudi Arabia to teach English. And he said, I know your son down in Philadelphia is ministry, and would he be interested in considering the little church that I pastor here in Haverhill? And so I talked to him on the phone, and he had me come up, and I preached, and then I came back again and became a candidate for the church, and became pastor in my first Sunday was first Sunday in October 1998.
1998.
So I came to pastor Ward Hill in 17 years ago.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. And you live in Haverhill?
Live in Haverhill in the church parsonage,
okay.
kitty corner to the church. there in Ward Hill on the Ward Hill Common, and really enjoy our neighborhood, and we have great neighbors and great kids, and we love Haverhill. I mean, Haverhill is a great city to raise a family, and I go to other communities that look nice, but Haverhill does feel like home to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I grew up in Haverhill, K through 12, straight through here. So, but one thing you kind of talked about there is you spent some time in Belgium, you said.
Yes.
So what was the occasion to be?
Well, my dad was on business
Okay.
there, so we spent a little over a year in Brussels.
Okay.
And so then that definitely made me interested in international things and global things, and hopefully I've kept my global awareness going. But that was a great shaping experience for a sophomore in high school.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, so you'd recommend studying abroad for those who have the opportunity.
Definitely.
Living abroad.
Yeah, living abroad,
if you
it
can.
definitely changes your perspective. It's and I think you end up appreciating I'm sure a lot of people watching this have probably studied abroad or traveled a lot abroad, and what's great about it is you not only appreciate the places you visit, but you also appreciate home more too.
Yeah.
I think it raises your appreciation for both.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so the church that you're at now is Ward Hill Church of Christ the King. Is that right? Okay. And where's that located?
It's in Ward Hill, and down the road in that part of Bradford. It started as an outpost of First Church of Christ, Bradford.
Okay.
In the 1820s, coming to the end of Jonathan Allen's pastorate in Ward Hill, the one that was instrumental in starting Bradford Academy, which became Bradford College. There were some people in Ward Hill who wanted a ministry out there, and so they started doing services at the old schoolhouse in Ward Hill, starting in the 1820s.
Okay.
And that went on for many decades throughout the 1800s. And then they moved from one schoolhouse to another schoolhouse. In fact, the one schoolhouse actually eventually became the clubhouse in Ward Hill, and maybe some of our viewers who remember some early days in Haverhill might remember the old clubhouse in Ward Hill. I think I've been told it was torn down maybe in the early 70s, if I have that right. And so that was where the church met for a while. Then in 1892, some money came in from William Knipe, the factory owner, and others, and they built what Reverend Kingsbury described as a tasty little chapel in one of his sermons at First Church of Christ. Okay. Built this tasty little chapel in Ward Hill. And so it's an interesting fact that Ward Hill actually had a building before it was a church. Usually it's the other way around. Mm-hmm. And so for 1 year, they were in the building still as a ministry of First Church of Christ, and then they realized it would make sense to organize their own daughter congregation. Mm-hmm. And so the church was organized in August 1893 as the Ward Hill Church of Christ. And we have just been going, we had a decision in the church in 2001 to add the King to the name because of, at that time, there was some confusion with some people thinking we were part of the Church of Christ denomination or something, and so people were wondering if we should change our name and something. And we didn't want to change our name officially, but we've been sort of doing business as Ward Hill Church of Christ the King. But it is a pretty lengthy name for a small church, I admit. And so usually we go by Ward Hill Church.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Okay, great. And tell us a little bit about the congregations. You guys are an active congregation.
Yes, a really fine group of people, and we're a small congregation. We in attendance, we have maybe 30 on a Sunday, a typical Sunday. Maybe a little less some summer Sundays, and a little more on special days. But it's for a small congregation, it's very diverse. Mm-hmm. We've have some diversity in ages. We have a lot of different backgrounds, and a really nice group of people, really committed to the community and their families and their neighborhoods, and I have had such an easy time there. I feel like something must be wrong because they're so good to me there, and they've never given me a hard time, and probably when I probably deserved it too from time to time. And I've really grown up there. I came to the church when I was 25 years old.
Yep. Yep.
So I was a kid. I look back at it now. I'm almost shocked that they, and some of the things I tried, I look back and I kind of am a little embarrassed about, and some of the ways I would approach some sermons in those days. And they've allowed me to grow up and make mistakes and learn, and they've been so encouraging to me and to my family, and it's really just a wonderful place. I tell the people in my church so often that, whatever I'm going through, when I gather with them on Sunday morning, I feel at peace. It makes me, the presence of God in that community is so real, and so I so appreciate it.
Excellent. So your plan would be to, Lord willing, retire there and stay there?
I have no plans to leave.
No plans to leave.
I hope that's not bad news to the community. They're probably thinking, we probably thought we'd get rid of them in a few years.
No, I don't think
so.
And
they actually had a history of short pastorates
really?
there.
Okay.
And that was almost by design in the beginning. As a small church, Andover and Andover Newton Seminary would send pastors there for a short while to kind of learn the trade and then send them on, move them on somewhere else. And we've also had, looking back in the history, of quite a few pastors that were bivocational. And I saw one of the pastors in the 30s and 40s also, he taught theology and religion at the Old Abbott Academy in Andover, and so it's similar to what I'm doing now, and teaching at an academy. And but there's a lot of turnover and short pastorates over the years. One of the families in our church, though, had a brother and uncle, Matt Smith, who was there a little longer, 11 or 12 years in the 80s, and he was really a good part of this community. Some people might remember him, Matthew Smith. And so he was there a little longer, and then after a couple other short pastorates, then I've come in, and I guess I'm not quite the longest yet. I think George Crediford is, but I'm catching up. It won't be long. I'm on George Crediford's trail.
You're on his tail,
here,
and you'll catch up to him.
Soon I will be the longest-serving pastor of Ward Hill.
Great. Excellent. And you mentioned, Alex, that they're affiliated with, you mentioned that you wanted to kind of separate the affiliation with the UCC, the United Church of Christ, which is a denomination that is probably fair to say theologically liberal. Mm-hmm. What you guys are dual affiliated with two other?
Well, we're in the Conservative Congregational Christian Conference,
sometimes called the 4 Cs.
The 4 Cs, yeah. And also, New England Congregational Christian Fellowship, which is actually part of the 4 Cs.
Okay, all right.
And that was started in the 1940s. During the 20th century, churches going through a lot. Changes, of course, with theology and maybe reworking their definitions of traditional Christian terminology, and redefining a lot of terms and actually believing different things about those things. And so there was a group of ministers within the congregational denomination, this is before the UCC merger at the time, that wanted a fellowship. And Harold John Ockengay of Park Street Church and others came together and started the 4 Cs. And that's mostly in New England.
So that's mostly in New England 4 Cs. You don't see that outside.
A little bit outside California. A little
really?
Bit. Lake Avenue Congregational in Pasadena is, I think, our largest church actually. Mm-hmm. But and then up the upper Midwest, you find a few. Okay. New York State. But you're right. I mean, I don't know if it's like half or something. It's a lot are in New England.
Okay.
Yeah, it definitely is in New England more than anywhere else. Mm-hmm. So some of those churches, didn't join the merger in the 1950s, and they have, but others have joined it later on. Our church joined that fellowship in 1989.
Okay.
And has been with them ever since.
Okay. So when people hear congregationalists, that's a pretty broad term. You have some who would be on theological liberal, and then there's some 4 Cs would be, so UCC would be on the theologically liberal side, the 4 Cs would be on the conservative side in terms of their view of Scripture and that kind of thing. Yeah,
I would say it's probably mainstream evangelical, if that's a good term to use. And so there's a spectrum, definitely, but it would definitely be, in terms of theology, a more conservative view of theology.
Okay. All right. And really, in many ways, very New England, when you think of its history. New England is a congregationalist sort of from the 18th century. Congregationalism's kind of had a long history here. Just to give people a sense too, what it would be like to come to Ward Hill Church and what a service would be like. So I'm going to give you two sides here. If you grew up as a Baptist, what would you be surprised at Ward Hill Church?
Well, that's a good question. I think that we are a more traditional church in our worship. We follow a sort of a traditional Protestant liturgy. Okay. It's not complicated. It's pretty simple, being congregational and Protestant. It's not hard to follow. And it's centered mostly around, obviously, scripture reading and scripturally based prayers and hymns. So there's a scriptural focus to the entire service. But it is quite simple and straightforward. But I do think that since there has been a move in a lot of churches to sort of less liturgy and more informality, it might strike some people as more formal than they're used to. However, it's not stuffy at all. We're a very kind of open, friendly church. We have a very long greeting time in the middle of the service. And so I don't think formal is really the proper word because we are, I would just say traditional, and we follow a traditional service. So some people might be surprised by that. They might not be used to that sort of traditional liturgy. But it wouldn't take them long to get accustomed to it because it is pretty simple.
Sure. Yeah. So on the flip side, if your background is Roman Catholic and you show up at Ward Hill Church, what would surprise you?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting there too that a lot of Roman Catholics, since the changing of the Mass in 1970 or so, right, a few years after Vatican II, the Roman Catholic Mass was changed quite a bit to reflect more early church patterns. And it was simplified and so on, and the way the lectionary is followed and the 3-year cycle and all of that, it's actually pretty similar in a lot of ways to the service we have. And Roman Catholics who come to our church, who maybe have been in the Catholic Church or are just visiting, notice how similar a lot of it is. We actually use the Revised Common Lectionary, and so we have a lot of the same scripture readings, and they feel very comfortable with the service, even though obviously there are certain approaches that are very different, being a Protestant church. But I think in some ways, ironically, maybe a Roman Catholic would have less to adjust to because of the way the liturgy is structured than some of our Protestant brothers and sisters.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe stylistically, a Roman Catholic would have less of an issue, but theologically, a Baptist would have less of an issue.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, a good point. Yes, definitely.
Yeah. One of the things you describe yourself, as I understand, as ecumenical. So it's kind of has to do with our conversation about denominations. Your assembly's interesting, Assembly of God background, and now more liturgical, maybe sacramental.
Yeah, and I've kind of gone through it all. I've traveled around in my head to many different places.
I'm sure. Yeah.
And I have, my grandparents were raised Unitarian, but they became Quakers. My mother is from a Swedish Pentecostal background. And so, I've probably a lot of things influencing me without even realizing it. But I call it, ecumenical is, I feel like it's a call that we have to bring unity to the church. And we were, it's the ecumenical creeds, as we call them, and the ecumenical vision is for churches to be united because that's what Christ's prayer is for us. And so I like to see it as a positive thing, that we need to be as unified as we can be. Now, obviously, there are issues of conscience and differences where sometimes there are barriers to fellowship in the churches because we just have very different views about things, honestly held differences. And so we may have to come to the point where we say, I respect you for your views, and I certainly, I don't question your motives, and I believe you probably have come to this in an honest way, but I have very different convictions, and it might cause some issues where we can't fellowship completely. But I like to see it as we should do as much as we can to be in unity. And that's why I like the fellowship I'm in, so much, and I'm not speaking against any other fellowship, but I feel like within our conference, the 4 Cs, there is that freedom to explore definitely historic Orthodox Christianity, but with but allowing for differences on certain on what we call secondary issues, and I really appreciate that about the conference.
Excellent. Yeah. West Congregational, they're Four Cs as well.
They're Four Cs as well. So we have 2 Four Cs churches in Haverhill.
Okay. All right. So would you say, Alex, that our denominations, are they a good thing?
Well, I think that they sometimes practically can work in positive ways. You know, they can bring people of like-minded, set of beliefs together, and they can work on things. And many times denominations do wonderful things. I mean, they have a common cause for mission. They work together to do charity work, help in disaster relief. I mean, they can come around so many great issues and unite people. And another nice thing about denominations is that you can bring people from very different parts of the country or the world together. Mm-hmm. And so that's a valuable thing. And I think that's, as long as that denomination is not closing itself off from others. Mm. And I think what's exciting locally is that you can try to have the best of both worlds. You might be in a denominational fellowship where you're connected to churches in other parts of New England or America or throughout the world. But you should also look to the other churches in your own town and say, this is sort of a denomination of its own. It's the Haverhill denomination of churches. And scripturally, really, that's the more important denomination, actually, right? When the church gathered in the different cities,
the Church of Philippi,
or Rome, or Corinth, or something. Mm-hmm. All of those churches. That's where you start the connection, and then of course you're connected to churches beyond that too, of course. But I think it's great to think about that, like how my church and your church really, we should probably be more connected than the Four Cs Church in California and my church, because in terms of common mission and understanding of how, because we are in the same community, we're in the same city. And so while there might be things that I can connect with that church in California with, and that can be positive, it's probably not as important as the connection we have at the churches here in Haverhill.
Yeah.
That's how I view it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, I think the last time we were together, we were sitting with Paul, who was a kind of charismatic Calvinist, and then that theologically, and then was you, more of traditional Reformed, and then there was Dan, who was a Presbyterian, and then was me as a Baptist, and we're all just in fellowship. And those type of differences. And I think, like you said, I think denominations do have a role. People can be a little too negative about them, but they help define what kind of church you are. When someone comes there and.
Absolutely. But I think that they do get a bad rap.
They get a bad rap,
and maybe deservedly so in some ways, because there is that negative side where you are very comfortable in your denomination, so you close yourself off. That's the negative aspect. But it can, if it's done, if you can avoid that, there's a lot of positives.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, speaking of sort of non-denominational or kind of interdenominational, you are, as we said, you're kind of a dual roles in terms of ministering here in Haverhill. One as a pastor, but also as a history instructor at Bradford Christian Academy, which is non-denominational or interdenominational.
That's right.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Bradford Christian Academy first. What is that?
Well, Bradford Christian Academy is a relatively new school in the sense that it started in 2004. These amazing people, mostly at West Congregational Church, but maybe other places too, came together to pray for a Christian-based school in this community. And it's a remarkable story, and you talk to the head of school, Victoria Kennedy, or our Dean of Academics, Lauren Stevens, or others that were involved in this, and it really is an amazing story how they came together and prayed for this school to come about, and then through, I guess as Saint Benedict would say, pray and work, ora et labora. They prayed, but they also worked. They did a lot to get the school off the ground.
Oh, sure.
And so it's a great school, a great vision for, definitely a commitment to excellent academics, college preparatory academics, but also a vision to have an education with a Christian faith perspective. And from the very beginning, the school's been open not just to various Protestant families, but also reaching out to even Catholic and Orthodox Christian families as well. And so there is an ecumenical vision for the school to for those who are looking for a Christian education, they can find a home at Bradford Christian Academy. And it's been an exciting ride for the school. Of course, a young school, only 11 years old or so, but it really is moving in some exciting directions. We had a big uptick in enrollment this year, and a lot of really nice new kids. And with new kids came a lot of new staff members as well, new faculty, and that's added a lot to our community. So it's a nice alternative for people if they want to look at their educational options. And I'm a pro Haverhill guy, so I love all the options we have here. Whittier Tech and Haverhill High, and we have great options. And we have Central Catholic and the different schools around here. But Bradford Christian, I think, just adds another positive choice for people. If you're looking for a little smaller school for your child, but a school that really where a kid can explore and have a really good interaction with teachers and also.
What's the total enrollment there?
Well, the total, I should have the numbers of it.
Oh,
at the high school, it's about 140, I
Okay,
think,
so it's
and then maybe another 100 or so in the lower school. So
Okay.
I'm guessing 240, 250. I apologize if I'm wrong on
No,
those
it's
numbers, but so yeah, we're definitely growing,
Yeah.
and so it provides a good option for people, and it's a good place to get an education.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So where is it located? Where's people
Well,
around?
the lower schools, we call it grades 1 through 8, meet at the old Knipe School, which used to be a public school there in Ward Hill. And so they meet there. And then the grades 9 through 12, we have an agreement with the North Point Bible College. We use part of their Hasseltine building. We have 11 classrooms or something like that in that building.
So the old Bradford College.
The old Bradford
current
College
Point,
campus, now North Point. And so we, through an agreement with them, we have that part of their building. Yeah, and we also, and I should say, we also use space at First Church of Christ
Okay.
in Bradford. We have some extracurricular activities there, phys ed there, and some administrative offices in what used to be the preschool that was housed there at First Church. So we use sort of that end of the building, so to speak. People know that building, the gym and the classrooms under it. We have that space as well.
Okay. Very good. Well, I think for our viewers here, if you haven't been able to notice, Alex has a love for history. I think because a lot of these questions end up with a little bit of a little history lesson, a nice little history lesson. So you are the instructor of history at Bradford Christian Academy. So what does that cover? I mean, is that you got ancient history, Western civilization, U.S. history? I mean, everything. Is that
Yes, I've taught it all there because especially when it was a little smaller, I literally taught it all the history. But now we have some other people, which is great. We have some history people on staff who share time between the lower school, the middle school, and the high school, and they're helping me out a great deal. I really appreciate them. But I do still teach a lot. I teach modern world history and also the advanced placement version of the AP European history.
Okay.
And then I no longer, this year anyway, I don't teach regular American history, but I am still the person for AP US history. And then I teach various things, I teach a comparative governments class. I've taught a course on the history of the arts and aesthetics. I've taught history and philosophy of science, various electives. And so, but I do coordinate the history curriculum there at the school.
Okay, excellent. Are you a difficult teacher, Ali? And some of your students might be watching.
Yeah, that's right.
Watch this,
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I hope not. But I definitely want them to be good thinkers and good writers. And we have a lot of, I really believe in class discussion, and I try to get them engaged on issues. And some do say I'm a hard grader. I don't think so, but I guess that's the opinion of some. And so it probably depends on the class. I'm sure my AP students would say that I worked them too hard, But as I say, well, we're all in this together. We've got to get to that exam in May and slay that exam together. So let's get on board and do it.
Absolutely, yeah. And they say the teachers you remember the best or the most are the ones who were maybe the hardest on you and pushed you to advance. So don't feel bad.
So I hope they remember me in good ways.
I'm
So
sure
we'll
they
see.
will. Yes. A question for you, because we have a very broad audience, and you kind of touched on it a little bit.
Yeah.
There's some might say, why not send your kids to the public school? Why send them to a Christian school? Even some who may be Christian families may feel like, well, isn't that kind of sheltering them? Don't they need to have the exposure to all different views, all different religions, all different viewpoints by sending them to a Christian school? I'm not saying this is my view, of course. I'm just for conversation. What do you think about that? What do you think of how would you respond to someone who says, look, I think Christian schools are maybe a detriment in that they're sheltering Christian kids from what's really going on, the diversity and the tolerance of the world?
Well, I think every family has to make, its own decisions, and based on certain principles, of course. Principles of, every family, I would think, wants to impart to their children what they believe is the best way to live in this world. And for Christian people, that's, to be a follower of Christ and to believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, and to love God and love your neighbor and all of those things. And so that's the goal, I would think, of every Christian family. How you achieve that goal might differ depending on family circumstances, and the child you're dealing with. Every child is different. And I think that the best thing to remember is that we're all responsible for our children's education. We can't make excuses. We can't say it's some other person's fault. In the end, we can't say, well, they weren't educated and it wasn't, I had nothing to do with it. I think we all have to own it and do the best that we can for our children. How you use the resources of your community or institutions may vary. And I think that there are some who, school at home, that's the best decision for one or more of their children. Other people may use independent schools, private institutions like Bradford Christian Academy or parochial schools, and they find that's the best way to get the result they want for their child. And others may use the public schools, and the public schools, do a great job. They often get a bad rap, and teachers are doing the best they can, and I think that we should support all the different options in our community. But yet know for your child that, one choice might be better than the other. So as a pastor, anyway, I'm not going to tell my congregation the specifics of how they need to educate their children. I'll just join with them in the goals and make sure that, if one option's having a detrimental effect on their child, well, then maybe they should, consider another option and move in that direction. And so I think we need to be careful not to judge. And of course, people have different, some children need a lot of special education help. For some, it's a financial concern. For others, I think the sheltering aspect is an interesting one. And I think that does really depend on the child so much. Obviously their age and development, but also how they're influenced by their peers and those around them. There might be a different option for each kid. Even within the same family, you might choose different paths.
Good answer. I think I agree. I like what you said too, Alex. That ultimately the role of seeing your kid educated still remains on the parents, regardless of what option you take. That if your kids are in public schools, still you're overseeing what they're doing. Ideally, obviously there are broken homes, and we get that, difficult situations, single moms, and that kind of thing. But even if you're sending your kid to a Christian school, you're still overseeing, and the teachers kind of expect, I would assume, expect the parents to kind of be involved in the process, and certainly with homeschooling, the same thing.
Absolutely.
So I think, in like you were saying, sheltering may not be an issue depending on other involvements in the community and other areas and friendships that are being made. And school is one aspect.
That's a good point. School is not the only place where your child exists in the community. At least it shouldn't be, right? And so your child's going to be involved in Riverside Bradford baseball or PAL soccer or whatever, or musical groups. And so there are many ways. Your children should be engaged in the community in many different ways, not just in schooling. So school is just one aspect.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Like I said, I went to Haverhill Public Schools. Great time there, and enjoyed the school system. A great school system. My son has done public school. Has done BCA for 2 years.
Oh,
and really
good.
enjoyed it.
Nice.
Enjoyed the lower school, as you
Excellent.
said, and we've done a couple of years of homeschooling with him too. So he's kind of seen the whole array,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
kind of nice to
That's
kind
great,
of to experience the whole picture there. So,
Excellent.
but all the folks at BCA really are amazing people.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I work with amazing people, and the students are great. And I guess I will, after I said all about education, I will put in a little plug. Look into BCA. It's a treasure here in this community.
It certainly is.
And it might be the right thing for your kid.
Yeah, definitely. Good. We're going to kind of pick your history brain a little bit, Alex, if it's okay. So this should come out around Thanksgiving, I would assume, if everything goes through. Tell us a little bit about Massachusetts Bay Colony, the Pilgrims, and Thanksgiving, that whole beginning. Give us a little history, someone that may not know the connections there.
Okay, well, that's good. And of course, I would recommend, I would read Mayflower.
Yes, good book.
It's a great book. It's an interesting history. There were a lot of mistakes made, when the Europeans came to these shores, on both sides. Of course, the more powerful side bears a little more responsibility, and that's fair. But I also like to look at positively. There were a lot of wonderful things that happened too. Terrible mistakes made, terrible things happened, but many good things happened too. And there were many people that maybe laid the foundation for hopefully what we have today. That we do believe in in getting along with people of differences and so on. And rather than just simply condemn the people of the past, we should thank them, because even though they may have made mistakes, they provided principles and guidelines for us to build on and to learn from those mistakes that they made and try to be better as a community today. So I think we should look at history in a positive way. I don't think we should be over nostalgic about it. People have been people, throughout history, have done stupid things. We need to own up to all of that. But we also shouldn't have sort of just a totally negative view of the people who have gone before us. I try to teach my students to appreciate the good and the bad among people, but love them as you would love your neighbor. Love them as you love the people in the community. Even if you would differ with them or say, oh, they really goofed there, try to be loving and understanding of them and appreciate where they're coming from. And the fear they must have had, coming into these new shores, the Pilgrims, when they came to this shore, the separatists, as they were called in England, and spent some time in Holland, exiles from their own country, and then tried to make a small part of them tried to make a new home here in these shores, and left many of their loved ones behind in Holland, and they had left some behind in England previously. And they're coming to this new land, trying to make a go of it, and it's really remarkable what they did. And the story of the first Thanksgiving, which is, some people say, oh, it's all a myth, it didn't happen. Well, some of the things are mythical about it, but there was definitely a gathering. We have documents, Bradford later in journal and other journals, that there people, the Pilgrims and the Indians did actually share a feast together, and it's there are primary documents from the time that talk about it, and it's a moment, and it doesn't mean that everything was great all the time, but it's a moment we should celebrate. That there was a moment in time where there was unity around feasting and celebration, and of course, from the Pilgrims' perspective, they were giving thanks to God for their provision, and giving thanks to the Indians too for helping them through that difficult winter where so many died, so many perished. So I think we should, yes, own up to history, own up to the problems, and be honest about it, but we should also, it's okay to celebrate. It's okay to see moments in history that are worth celebrating and feeling good about. And I think, I think we can enjoy our Thanksgiving meal without any guilt whatsoever. We can celebrate that it was a good moment in those early years.
Sure. Yeah. I think you look at any snapshot of history, and you're going to find great faults, great problems, as well as great blessings, great successes at that period in time. So, yeah, I think it was. I forget who it was. Maybe it was my son who said to me, we were talking about the Salem witch trials.
Yeah.
And, people talked about their faith, which led them to sort of prosecute these people as witches. And his question to me was, well, weren't the people who were being falsely accused, didn't they share the same faith?
Yeah.
And they did.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that's an excellent point.
It's a very good point, isn't it?
And some of them were even ministers, right?
Exactly.
There was a minister that was hanged. And an interesting thing, and this is in no way excusing what happened, but the reason why we probably know so much about it was that in the about 10, 12 years after, I think, it happened, people felt so bad about it that they talked about it a lot, and they went into their churches and they repented of it and said, we really goofed. This was terrible what we did. And those very same people that did that horrible thing, it was through their feeling sorry for what they did. That may be the reason we know so much about it. And it's sort of an irony there that we use it to condemn them, and it was terrible, there's no doubt. But and it was kind of an out-of-control situation. There were a lot of factors that played into it. And it was actually ministers from Boston who came and said, I think you've taken it too far. Actually, it's a proud Haverhill moment there because Judge Saltonstall was asked to come down and look at the proceedings. And when he went down there, he thought, this is crazy. These people are nuts. They've lost total control. I'm headed back to Haverhill. So he didn't want any part of it. So a good Haverhill moment. But it was those very same people, realized, we really messed up, and it was, and there again, there's a moment in history where it's bad, but what a great lesson it taught, and the people afterwards were determined this will never happen again. We're not going to let things come to this point, and so they reformed some of the judicial practices, and there's a lot there about, there was a lot of too much local power at the time. It was after the rebellions of the Glorious Revolution in England, but it actually was peaceful in England, but not always that peaceful here in the colonies. And there was really no central government for a while in Massachusetts. It was sort of chaotic. And so local communities were going in their different directions, and sometimes that was fine if you had wise local leaders. But obviously in Salem Village, which is now Danvers, right, it didn't go so well. So.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. A couple of other questions, kind of turning the discussion a little bit. So you kind of wear those both hats of pastor and teacher at this time. Are you encouraged, discouraged about what's going on in the church in the United States right now, and why?
Well, I guess I'll probably I don't want to have a simple answer to that. I guess it is complicated. I think there are many good things, of course, and I want to focus on the positives. And there are people more than ever, I think, some of my students are very globally aware. They're aware of the church around the world and issues around the world they need to address. I think that in many ways we are more connected to the church around the world than we ever have before. And you see that with the amazing amount of money that is sent to Africa and other parts of the world. And the church, the American church is so generous and gives so much money, so much time. People go overseas and give of their time, mercy ships, going around Africa and helping people. And so there's such a good story there for the American church. It's doing a lot of good in the world and really helping a lot of people. And even in this country, going into the cities and running ministries. When I worked in South Philadelphia, the churches were the ones. We did racial reconciliation rallies in the 90s. There were a lot of racial tensions. We organized rallies to bring the churches together and bring the communities together across racial lines. So there's so much the church does, and so I don't want to just say, the church is messed up, because I think of all those good people who are doing amazing work in this country and around the world. But there always is the other side to it, and I think if you look at the church in America, there's this desire to be, I guess to be so relevant that sometimes the message gets lost, and the message that seems to be out there that I see a lot is Christianity is there to make your life easy, so you can make good money and live an easy life, and it appeals to, I think, all the wrong things that in terms of what it means to believe in Christ. And it's all about how your life is going to be now and how you're going to enjoy your life, and it plays into the sort of typical American issues of the American dream and greed, and I'm going to make my life as comfortable as I can, and I'm not going to worry about anyone else. And that's not total story of America. Don't get me wrong. America is a wonderful place, but there is that side of us, that appeals to, and I think when the church plays into that, we're not really helping people out very much. And so I think we're very consumeristic, very materialistic, and I really feel like that's definitely the thing that drags the church down in America, probably more than anything else.
Okay. Similar question, and kind of maybe not switching hats necessarily, but are you encouraged or discouraged about what's kind of happening in our country right now, the direction of our country?
Once again, I think it depends on what you look at. I think there's an awareness now of things. Social media and so on. People have an awareness they've never had before, and that can be so positive. And people are aware of issues, and the people how they reach out to one another. I think there's this great response in this country that continues, and I find that that's more vibrant than ever, I think, and so that's a positive thing. But on the negative side, I think that there is a tendency to live just for ourselves, worry about our number one, selfish desires, and all our wealth is the real temptation. We can live an easy life, so we're tempted by that. That's our focus, and so that always drags us down. And I do think that in one sense we have I guess it's it's paradoxical, right? In one sense we talk about diversity and tolerance and living together as a community, and that can be good. But then on the other hand, we lack civility. We don't treat each other very nicely. In the past, that's one thing they had that we don't have as much of. The way they treated each other with politeness and respect and kindness. And I think that we've become kind of a vulgar, crass society in some ways. While we also are emphasizing getting along, we in our day-to-day operation, we might say we believe in getting along with our neighbors and living in a great community, and then we treat the waiter in a rude way, or we curse out the guy who's cut us off in traffic or something, and I feel like, and we almost justify it. We say, well, they're getting in my way, and rather than really think about the other person and be aware of, maybe that guy who cut you off is going through really hard times. Maybe he's not thinking very straight in his driving because he's lost a loved one recently or lost his job. And, we need to think more about where people might be coming from and not be so quick to judge. And so I find our society has become extremely judgmental. Our society passes quick judgments on people, and if you don't line up with my thinking, I guess I do get discouraged at my Facebook page from my friends on the left and the right, the way they speak about other people, people on the other side of the political spectrum, or just with no regard for how people do think about things differently, perhaps, or just because they disagree with you, it doesn't mean they're bad people. And I wish that my liberal and conservative friends would maybe stop before they post some of those things and think, that the people on the other side of the political spectrum, their mothers and their fathers and their grandparents and their brothers and their sisters and uncles and aunts, and they're people that are cherished by other people. And so I would like to see more civility and more of a respect for people's, where people are coming from, and that would be my hope. So I think in that sense, I'm worried about the direction of the country. And then some of the consumeristic aspects seeps into all of it. I talked about how I was in the church, but this idea that I shape my own life. I am the master of my own fate. And there's a partial truth to that. You bear responsibility. What you do and the decisions you make are important. But I think if we give our lives to God in the way He's given His life to us, that's God has given His life to us through Jesus Christ, giving Himself for us completely, and that's the act of love that obviously changes us, rescues us from our sorry state, and but it not only rescues us, it transforms us, because we see that's the way to live, to offer ourselves to God and to other people, and that's a powerful message. The gospel message really just coming through our lives, and that's my hope. That we would live in a society that's a society of love. Where we really love each other and care for one another, and are willing to do anything for the other person, because just purely out of love.
Excellent. Yeah, it reminds me of a little story of G.K. Chesterton, where he was asked to write an essay about what's wrong with the world. Maybe you've heard this before, and he responded with a letter that said, "Dear sirs, I am sincerely G.K. Chesterton."
Nice,
It begins with my own heart, my own issues, and
lovely, yeah.
And one more of those. Are you encouraged or discouraged, Alex, about what's going on in Haverhill right now? What's going on in our own town, our own city?
Well, mostly encouraged. I mean, I think that our city is doing great. I noticed the steel girders, going up on the Harbor Place, and exciting things happening. The downtown looks great, and it's just a lovely community to live in. And I think that anyone who lives in Haverhill, should be grateful, because I certainly am. But yeah, we have problems, don't we? I mean, I think heroin is just, we're drowning in it, right? And I've been praying about that a lot recently. Actually, we've been bringing it up in our church prayer meetings, and we actually our lives were touched indirectly through a relative of someone in our church. Of course, I don't want to get into details on that, but it has affected our congregation, and I'm sure other congregations are very much affected by this, and our communities. And I really hope that's one of those common cause things that maybe people from different sides of the political spectrum or different, we can all agree on that, right? That heroin's just killing us, and it's taking loved ones from us and ruining lives. And I hope that Haverhill can do something about it. Obviously, it's more than just Haverhill; it's the other communities, it's our state, it's our nation. But that is really weighing on me. And so I guess that would be one of my biggest concerns for Haverhill. And also, just getting to know people from other parts of the community. If we live in one part of Haverhill, to be aware that this is our city and not just our neighborhoods, but wherever we live, we're connected to everyone. And if it's something bad is happening in Haverhill, even if it's not our neighborhood or it doesn't directly affect us, we should own it and say this is our community. And we in Ward Hill, we have at our church, we have people from a smaller church as it is, we have different parts of Haverhill, both sides of the river, and then some people Methuen and so on, and Boxford. But they come from different communities in Haverhill, different socioeconomic classes and so on. But that's what's the beautiful thing about the church. It can bring people together. And the common cause, obviously, in the church is Jesus Christ, but it brings people from very different backgrounds. And I think that's a model for city life. We come from different places, but we have a common cause, and we all live in this community. And so I hope that Haverhill continues to do well and grow and prosper, but I hope that is true for everyone. And our young people, I hope they stay away from the opiates and the heroin, and look instead to a better life. And of course, as a Christian minister, I would say, give your life to Jesus Christ, and He will make your life exactly what it should be.
Well, thank you, Alex, and Pastor Alex, and I think Ward Hill Church and Pastor Alex Burgess are a real gem here in Haverhill, And hopefully maybe some folks who are looking for a church would pop in. And Sundays at what time?
You're welcome anytime. 10 a.m.
10 a.m. Excellent.
10 a.m. And we have usually good snacks afterwards and really friendly people.
I'm sure you guys do. So, well, thank you to our listening audience and viewers here for listening in to our show here, Faith in Haverhill. If you want to contact us with any questions or comments, please feel free to do so at rick@fbchaverhill.org. We'd love to hear from you and get any feedback. I'm certainly hearing from people in the community who are watching the show, which is great to hear. So hopefully you'll join us next month. Thanks a lot.